Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today is the first Monday video of the month, which means it is time to get to business with you guys. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. Number one way to be featured here on the channel is with the video that we're doing today, which is LMIAY, where I give you a monthly prompt. You write a short story that pertains to the prompt, and always I try to make the first Monday video of the month that video where we bask in your guys' brilliance. The other way is if you're an indie author with a book coming out or a book that is already out, submit the first chapter in the cover in the Fresh Meat feature, and at a random interval, it should be featured here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your book and maybe their next favorite read. Also, if you would like to suggest anything that I do here on the channel, reactions, news, things that you'd like to see me talk about, whatever, there is also a place to submit topics. So there's that. And then number three, if you would like to check out any of my work, all of those are available at your favorite retailers. Also, links down below to find my work. I've got a new one theoretically coming out in October, the third in the Bodymore trilogy. Look forward to it. I hope I don't disappoint. It's been a time. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and get into the challenge. But in honor of having read the Southern Book Club's guide for slaying vampires and my best friend's exorcism, I don't want to say that Grady Hendrix has obvious mommy issues, but I definitely read some low-key screaming of mommy issues and an obsession with urine. And considering May is also Mother's Day month, I gave you guys the prompt of a story inspired by or displaying mommy issues. So we can all go through a coping session together. I hope it was therapeutic. But let's see what you guys all have to reveal about yourselves today. The first story is by Allison Miller, titled Das Fleischhaus. Oh. If that name, and it being in German, is going to say something about Allison, this could be a grindhouse. April sat down at her desk and turned her computer on, using the hotel's Wi-Fi to live stream. Sorry, this is such a bad video, train wrecks. I was hoping to spend my time in Germany with my brother Carl, but all he wanted to do was get drunk, and we had a falling out because I refused. I spent too many years addicted to drugs. I don't even touch alcohol. Anyway, have any of you ever been to Germany? I've been here since I went on my mission years ago. A comment caught her eye. Hello, Schmetterling. Her eyes lit up. Josef Strauss. They had a discussion back and forth in German. He had a restaurant called Das Fleischhaus, which he boasted was best of Berlin. Many memories of him came to her. As an LDS missionary, she wasn't supposed to be alone with boys, but she had made an excuse to sneak out several nights to see him. He was her first kiss and begged her not to go home. Her partner caught her, and she took a transfer to Hamburg rather than home. She didn't ever get a chance to say goodbye. She and him exchanged information and video chatted for hours, promising that she'd go to his restaurant tomorrow. Carl apologized for his insensitivity and asked to join her at a diner the next night. Joseph came out and kissed her lips. She had to control herself and not get caught up in the moment. So, this is the man that you were almost sent home for? Carl asked, sneering at Joseph. I expected more. Well, you are exactly what I expected, Joseph said, returning to the kitchen. You're not better than Mom, and I don't know why I keep letting you back in my life, April said. You're going home, and I never want to see you again. As she was editing and uploading her last video, Joseph entered her chat box. She told him her hotel and room number, and he was there minutes later. Like the last 20 years hadn't happened, he picked her up, pressed her against the wall, and kissed her. Their hands worked as if they touched each other before, knowing what buttons to undo, where to caress and kiss before tumbling onto the bed. This was the one missed connection she regretted. One night, she rolled over to pull Joseph close to her and found him gone. She got up, put her slippers on, and went into the living room. He wasn't in their apartment. Wrapping her coat around her and putting on some proper shoes, she advanced to the restaurant. The door was open. The light was on in the kitchen. April pushed the door to the kitchen open, sliding in as still as a mouse, and eased the door closed. No one was looking in her direction when she came upon the image of her mother and brother on their knees, hands tied behind their backs. "What is this?" she asked, unable to stop herself. Everyone turned. Two big men grabbed her and dragged her over. Joseph commanded them in German to let her go and ordered her to sit, producing a chair. April took a tentative step forward and flopped down in the chair. Joseph produced another chair, took her face, and made her look him in the eye. In German, he asked her about the night of their first kiss, prodding her to remember their conversation. The pixelated image came through clear. Each time they heard her barreled to the front of her mind. She only told him of the incident where she played too long in the creek and they held her hand on a hot griddle. The time they caught her in the throes of love with a boy and smashed her hand in the door, making him watch. And after she came home off the mission trip and converted no one. They didn't even believe in religion. But that didn't stop them from taking a meat cleaver to her head. Had her mom had the strength that she had in her youth, April would be dead. Tears fell from her eyes as she opened them, hoarsely whispering, "How could I forget all of that?" Joseph was at her side and said, "The mind does what it can to protect you. Sometimes it fucks up and causes harm. One thing our country knows and what yours needs to learn, böse Männer sollten ihre Taten nicht vergessen dürfen." April backed up and looked in her mother's eyes. No remorse could be found. The same lack of empathy resided in Carl's eyes. "Dad didn't run away, did he?" Mom smirked. "No, he was in the way when I was punishing you." Mom lapsed into her horrific retelling of the murder of April's father, not excising a single gory detail. The knife plunged deep into Carl's throat. Foamy blood spilled from his mouth, like red cream soda. "Fleischklopfer," April said, holding out her hand. Her mother's mouth moved, but the sound wasn't there for April. As the object lit on her hand, April raised it, bringing it down again and again on her mother's head. She fell forward, and April hit her until the skull opened, resembling cherry cobbler. This explains so much. The surgeries she had to have on her back when she was younger, the memories that she couldn't remember, and the pain every time Carl was around. She watched the blood ooze from their bodies, tears pouring from her eyes. It wasn't from regret at doing it, but from not doing it before. Carl's phone vibrated, and she pulled it from her pocket. There was an exchange between him and Mom, where she shared one of her videos to him. "Carl, she's going into hypnosis to uncover her memories." "Mom, we can't let that little cunt do this to us." April dropped it into the trash and set about helping everyone. April dropped it into the trash and set about helping them clean up the mess. Well, you did not disappoint on the Grindhouse, that's for sure. I feel like this could be so good by adding some more setting to it, but I love setting. I love making setting part of the characters, like almost a character of its own, if not a character of its own. And this story has what it takes to make the vibe for the place its very own creepy character. Nicely done, Allison. The next story is by H.Bird, titled Harold Cawthorne, born in 1935, received 1943. "How did this happen?" Barbara asked the boy, taking a seat next to him on the seat. Barbara asked the boy, taking a seat next to him on the bed. His face didn't look to be that badly bruised. No cuts on the cheek, no bloody nose or split lip, but his eyes were a vivid red from the crying that must have stopped just before she'd gotten there. Harry looked away from her, not wanting to answer, but Barbara had seen how poorly the other woman did with him, barking and badgering at the boy to simply obey. Whatever would make their lives easier, right? But it never resolved anything. Barbara had a different plan. "I'm not gonna leave," she said, wiggling playfully where she sat. The old metal springs creaked beneath her, and the mattress moved beneath them both, touching him without touching him. "I still want to hear from you," she told him. She wasn't going to force the boy to speak, but she was ready to wait him out. Or at least she would wait long enough to give a 20-year-old the impression that she would be there forever, and that there was no escaping her. Harry tried to ignore her, just saying nothing, looking toward the window. But after long, quiet moments had passed and he glanced over at her again, Barbara was still there, smiling back at him, irreverent and unmoved. Finally, the boy spoke. "Franklin just decided to hit me," he said quietly, as if that were all there was to it. "What, he hit you out of nowhere?" Barbara pressed. "Over nothing?" Harry took a shaky breath. I don't know. Well, what was happening before he hit you? Barbara tried, laying it out like an arithmetic problem, trying to get all of the pieces in front of him so that he would put it together himself. Were you boys talking, playing? Was it something to do with those comic books again? She suggested. Was it just you two boys, or just us two? Harry said quietly. Even when he interrupted, he was a quiet boy. And what was happening? Barbara prompted him again. Were you boys talking about something? Yeah. About what, Harry? She could practically see the words on the tip of his tongue, but he'd gone quiet again. I'm not here to get you in trouble, Barbara tried to reassure him. Have I ever yelled at you? Not that I can remember, he said. That stung her, that he couldn't just say no. But she tried to remind herself that he didn't mean it personally. Why wouldn't someone in his shoes be doubtful, expecting the worst? So what was it about? He was talking about where he came from, his family, Harry clarified. Already, Barbara was worried. Nothing good came from when the boys were talking about their past lives. Most of them had been brought to the orphanage so young that what they remembered was hazy, mistaken, or completely made up. These discussions quickly became a boasting match where the boys dreamed up infinite ways to hurt one another, belittling real memories with confected ones. I know I'm not supposed to talk about that stuff. No, go ahead, Barbara encouraged him. She was here for him, after all. She'd already told him that she wasn't going to get him in trouble. She wanted to get to the bottom of what had happened with the fight, sure, but she really wanted to understand the boy. He was talking about his old family, Harry explained, telling stories, as if he'd just been with them, like it was yesterday. His mom was a nurse during the war, and she still helped out at a clinic on weekends. His dad was big and strong, and he coached his football team, and then he got in an accident. What accident? Barbara coaxed. The car accident. It killed both his parents, Harry said. What a story for Franklin to have been telling. Barbara understood why the boy might want to reminisce, but what good did he think would come from telling other boys about this? And apparently his grandparents had died earlier too, Harry recalled, before the war. I forgot if he said that it was from TB or something to do with the Depression, so he ended up here, because there was no one else to take him in. Barbara was quiet for a longer moment, but it seemed that the story had ended. So, when did you boys start fighting? She asked, genuinely confused. Harry started, awkward and uncomfortable, not sure how to say it, but Barbara was still there for him, still not leaving. The boy tried to push forward somehow. I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. Maybe you didn't, Barbara offered. Maybe there was a misunderstanding besides. Right and wrong? She said with a smirk. I'm sure the sisters here would agree that that's for God to judge, not her. But Harry looked skeptical. Maybe he was right too. Maybe if it were one of the nuns sitting here instead of her, that they'd come with a ruler for the back of his hands. So then what? Barbara asked him. Harry's breaths came shallow and ragged again, as if he hadn't stopped crying the whole time that he'd been talking to her, fighting with the memories, trying to find the right words. Barbara tried to work out what his expression was. Pain, embarrassment, regret, anger. But he looked away, trying to hide his face from her. I just pointed out, Harry tried. I just said that at least his parents still wanted to be there. They would have still been with him if they could, since they died in an accident, Harry explained. It wasn't their choice. I told him that he could at least hold on to that knowledge, that they would have stayed if they could, the boy repeated quietly. Barbara knew Harry's file. She knew the contrast that he was drawing. Not every boy had the memory of parents who loved them, and who would have stayed with them if only they could have. I thought I was doing something kind, Harry said, trying to put things into perspective, help him to see the silver lining. He finally looked up at her, halfway to tears again. But then he just started hitting me. Barbara held the boy. Perhaps the nuns wouldn't have done the same, and Barbara thought them all the worse for it. Soon enough, she felt tears soaking through her blouse, but she didn't mind for a second. He didn't have any good reason to do that to you, Barbara explained, cradling his head against her chest. Some boys are just like that. You shouldn't have had it happen to you. He shouldn't have had any of this happen to him. Aww. You know, one of the things that constantly shows up in my stories, and like pretty much most of what I write, is the importance of love, and especially love in family, or love in the reliance of that partner that is going to be your other half. And I love stories about family. specifically stories about somebody finding a family or finding love in that family and that strength that gives them the chance to heal. And I can feel that in this story. Great job, Bird. The next story is by Jim Terry, titled Lorraine. Whitney sat at her kitchen table, staring impatiently through the storm doors. She tapped her fingers on a $100 check as she waited to confront her son. I heard you talking to Ethan about needing a new mouthpiece for your trombone, read the letter that accompanied the money. Here's a little something to help you buy a new one. I hope your parents don't mind. I do mind, Whitney whispered to herself. The letter was signed Mama Lorraine, though it hadn't been long since Whitney's son dropped the mama and simply called her Lorraine. How quickly he went from Miss Lorraine to losing all titles and formalities over the summer. With school around the corner and Lorraine in the carpool rotation, Whitney considered just how much time her son would spend with her. Well, Lorraine's sons will always be around, and Clark carpools with them too. She shook the thought out of her head that Lorraine could possibly be that much of a concern as she tapped her fingers faster and louder. She rested the base of her palm against her chin, so hard her knuckles embedded her teeth into her lip. Lost in thought, she almost missed the muffled ringtone chiming from deep inside of her yellow pastel tote bag. After feeling around for a moment, she dug it out and nearly fumbled it back into the heap of coupons and used tissues when she tapped the green icon on the screen to receive the call. Clark? Whitney asked, not knowing whether or not the microphone was close enough to her mouth before she spoke. Hi, Miss Whitney? Clark's voice stuttered on the other side. Is Saxon there? Whitney's throat squeezed. Clark would never call her first, nor would he allow Saxon to ignore him once or even twice, as annoying as it can be sometimes to find a handful of missed calls from Saxon's always anxious best friend. The fact that he was calling now was far more worrisome. He hasn't come home. Is he not with you? Clark groaned. Since this was our last day of band camp, some people wanted to go to Waffle House just to hang out. I came because I thought Saxon would be here too. Now I want to leave. Oh, you're not having fun, Cluck? Someone shouted in the background. Can you pick me up? Clark asked, lowering his voice. Why did you think Saxon was going? He never told me about it. Pressure formed in Whitney's chest as she gripped the sides of the table with her free hand. She stared ahead, waiting for Clark's every word. Oh, I mean, it was last minute, but did he tell you he was going? No, I saw him get into Ethan's car. I figured they didn't know that I was going. They left me, so I hitched a ride with someone else. Ethan's. Whitney stopped, her eyelids stretched and her breathing shallow. That's not Ethan's car. That's his mom's car. Clark, I want you to stay with your phone. Text Saxon every few minutes. Is everything okay? Whitney took a moment to form her words. Even during normal conversation, Clark was easy to scare. This time, Whitney was scared too. You text him and let me know when he texts you back, okay? I have some errands to take care of. The clangs and clatter of the Waffle House kitchen continued in the background while Clark said nothing. Clark, okay? Okay. Clark strained to whisper. He was always a perceptive child, overly sensitive. Whitney knew he knew, but she had no time to take care of his feelings and make him feel better before she hung up. Mama Lorraine, the letter read. The tempo of Whitney's breathing increased the longer she stared at it, allowing the thoughts she blocked before to enter her mind. Mama Lorraine. Lorraine, the bitch has my child. Without further hesitation, Whitney yanked the tote bag from the back of the chair next to her, knocking it onto the laminate floor. She didn't even consider locking up as she plowed through the storm door to find her son. Saxon, you getting a little MILF action? Lorraine, you need to not be picking up high school boys. Do we need to call some Chris Hansen in here? I see, a little bit more than slight mommy issues up in here. The next story is by L.L. Newell, titled Too Much Mercy. Chicken for the grill, watermelon, soda, chips, and corn on the cob. That was why Julie was at the store. The sticky heat of that July afternoon begged for the impromptu barbecue. Nothing crazy. Clint would fill the kiddie pool and dig out a handful of water balloons left over from the 4th, and they'd spend a lazy afternoon with the kids enjoying the sunshine and a rare family time between work and summer activities. Julie smiled to herself, imagining 8-month-old Luke kicking his fat little legs in the pool with his siblings. He loved the water, and she was sure that he'd take the cutest pictures in his little sun hat. She glanced at her phone and tried to think if she was forgetting anything. Satisfied, she made her way to the counter to pay, suppressing an eye roll at the longer-than-usual line. She'd only been to the store 20 minutes, but she was still eager to get home and enjoy the afternoon with her family. 20 minutes later, she was finally opening the back of her car to get the groceries inside. She stared uncomprehendingly into the back seat. It was 86 degrees outside. What was Luke doing here? I didn't bring him. But even if she didn't want to believe herself, she knew that it wasn't true. She remembered now picking out his little blue shorts and handsome like daddy tank top and chatting to him as she strapped him into the car seat almost an hour ago. Almost an hour? How long had she been in that store? It had to be even hotter inside than it was out. 32 minutes, she realized in horror. He'd been here alone in the heat for 32 minutes. She reached out and gently stroked his face. He responded, turning his red, sweaty face toward her and half smiling at her touch in his sleep as she felt time start moving again. He was alive and seemed normally aware. He was all right. She was suddenly aware of every stranger and camera in the lot and hurried to get into his seat and drive home away from them all. Once in the safety of her own driveway, she pulled him out of his sweaty seat. He was cooler now, the AC having done its job. She pulled him close. He opened his eyes and began pointing around him to the birds and passing cars. He was really okay. But she wasn't. She didn't deserve for him to be all right. Someone should have seen him and called the police. Someone should have broken their windows and posted her failure all over social media. People all over the world should be watching a video of her, calling her a monster, accusing her of intentionally trying to harm him. Clint should be threatening to divorce her and take all the children. CPS should have been getting involved this moment. Holding her perfectly happy, safe son in her arms couldn't possibly be real. Clint poked his head out and gave her a quick smile. Thought I heard your car. You need a hand? She stared at him blankly. Take the baby. Her own voice scared her. She felt like a monster. She didn't deserve to hold Luke, to call herself his mother. Clint's face puzzled at the tone in her voice as he took Luke into his arms. What is it? He asked. I forgot him, she whispered. No, I didn't forget him. I was thinking about him the whole time, all through the store, but I forgot that he was with me, Clint. I left him in the car. But I forgot that he was with me. Clint, I left him in the car. He tilted his head, not understanding, unable to picture his wife leaving their baby. She explained it to him again, her heart breaking as she watched his face twist from incomprehension to horror. When she'd finished, he said nothing, and she pushed past him into the house, greeted by the excited faces of her older daughters. How can you love me? I nearly lost you all, she thought as she circled around her daughters, chattering excitedly about the pool. Clint followed her inside and set Luke in his high chair. Julie, listen to me. Luke is fine. You're anemic and you're exhausted. Both of those things lead to forgetfulness and depression and an inability to focus properly. I know that, and I have ignored it. We're going to call my mom and see about getting you some extra help so that you can rest, and we're going to call the doctor and see what we can do to bring up your iron. She shook her head. You're making excuses for me. I don't deserve that. He sighed. Honey, you made a mistake, but he's fine. She stepped back. How can you say that? A mistake? Would you be so forgiving if he wasn't all right? Or if someone has seen and called the police? If I was calling you from jail now and a cop was driving you to the morgue? Clint shook his head. We're not doing that, Julie. We're not running through the what-ifs. We all fuck up, baby. All of us. Just thank God that we don't always get what we deserve. Today we got a second chance. We didn't do anything to deserve it. It is almost too much mercy to comprehend, but something in the universe was kind, and I'm not going to waste it. We're going to take it and get the help that we need. Julie looked over her shoulder at the children huddled together, watching their tablet, suddenly aware that she was going to make more mistakes. She could try to be perfect. She could still end up making mistakes, but she could feel like every day was a failure, and these babies would still think that she was a hero. It was unfair in a painfully beautiful way. She nodded. All right. Call your mom. It's so nice when a tragedy doesn't strike. Like, it's terrible when you make a mistake or you do something forgetful that is just something that you never stop thinking about because you're like, it was so easy to avoid that and you feel so bad, even though like you can be years in the future and think back to that bad decision that you made and it's still like it worked out without being the worst possible situation, but you still think about it and you still feel guilty. It's terrible. I am grateful that this story did not turn into a tragedy and that there is still love in this family to work together. The next story is by Egao Chan, titled Of the Day. Breakfast. It was a simple house, made of only a few sturdy wood pillars, some woven bamboo sheets and hay. Burke sat before a dirty and slightly crooked wooden table with a simple wooden plate in front of him. There was only one piece of slightly moldy bread in the plate, yet he tore it into smaller pieces with a wide grin and shoved them down his throat along with a crude clay mug of porridge. I do miss this, Burke said to the woman sitting across from him. The food is, well, poor and foul, but it was simple. The plate here, I made it by myself. Almost cut my finger off. Dad patched me up while you screamed at me. I guess you found a way out. You found the way out. But the price is? What? Do you even remember? I guess this is part of the deal, right? Burke put a mug down and took a quick glance at the shelf on the side. On the top level of the shelf was a book with a thick black cover, a somewhat out-of-place item as there was only simple cookware and tools on the other level. I can't even remember his face now. It's probably been decades. I can only say decades because I can't even remember how long ago it was, or what my father looked like. I guess the price of being gone was pretty literal, huh? Burke shook his head and paused for a moment, then cleaned the plate and mug with a click of his finger. Guess I wouldn't have missed it if I didn't try, but I've got your curiosity, Mom. Thought you'd be more proud. Is she dead? Is she dead, Egao? Is she dead and stuffed and sitting at the table? That's what I wonder. Lunch. It was a sizable mansion, one surrounded by flower gardens, fences, and guards. The table was made of luxury wood and glass. The plates were made of fine china and were accompanied by silverware. The food was freshly picked fruits, some smoked meat, and a large glob of ale. Burke sat across the table from the woman. His left hand fingers trembled as he picked the grapes and tomatoes due to the pain in his forearm. You know, I don't have too many fond memories of this place. Burke chewed the fresh tomatoes and let out a satisfied sigh. And the sad thing is, this is probably the first time that I've actually enjoyed food in the very room. I don't know if you've ever felt the same, but at least to my experience, an experience you've been a crucial part of, nothing tastes good when the magic is ramping in your body. Before he continued, he put his finger to his mouth and pulled out a crooked, blackened tooth. You know, they said these arts, they're bad for you. Pretty obvious now, I guess. I often wonder if that's why you have this on me. He then pulled down his left sleeve, showing a glowing ring of arcane marks on his left forearm. He then scoffed. But what kind of mother puts a mark of serfdom and perpetual indebtment on their kid? It almost made the young and naive me believe you cared. But it's not really what it is it? Having no response from the woman, Burke finished the plate and wiped the table clean. Have a good day, Mother. Supper. It was a stone wall castle, and the dining room was under a dome, lit by a floating gem in the air. Wooden seats covered a luxury fur, a long table made of marbles, supported by ivory legs, and plates and goblets made of bones of magical beasts. The goblet on the far end was filled with glistening magical wine, and in the plate lay a piece of steak with masterfully placed garnishes and sides. Burke busted into the room, sending the doors onto the wall, his right hand holding his right, with a dark and dripping wet cloth pouch dangling from his fingers. Hello there. Burke threw the pouch on the table right before the Queen of Crimson Flame. His face was pale and sweaty. He had no poise or grace at all. The priceless wine splashed all over his chest, and the steak was a bloody mess on his face when he shoved it into his mouth using his right hand. I did learn a lot from you. Burke threw himself onto the chair, stroking his hair using his right hand, and caressed his smooth young face. Spells are cast in language, and language is rooted in interpretation. Therefore, prices paid on my behalf are open to my interpretation as well. His eyes glanced the face of the woman up and down, then shook his head. Yeah, I know, exactly. How am I ever going to get through to your stone heart? They said the appearance will mimic the true appearance of one's soul, and now look at you. The woman did not respond, for she simply could not. Her face was once covered in stone and crystallized energy, and now that was all it was. The only indication of her presence was the faint flickering glow in her now translucent eyes. The deal was, I shall not act against you because I am your flesh and blood, and I have been given everything by you. Burke smiled and spoke through his teeth. If you will, or can, that gift of mine was your flesh and blood, with a mark you bestowed much more than what I weighed when I left your body of once flesh and blood, and all this, he pointed at the dome on his right index finger, is still yours. The castle crumbled and caved into a mountain of lava and fire behind Burke. The wound on his left elbow burned and his entire body aged. Magic was draining from his very soul, and his footsteps were steady, his laughs heartfelt, and his tears warm and salty. I didn't think that, when it's, you know, in the breakfast part, I didn't think that it was going to go into, like, super magic or more of the medieval with the castle, and then it kind of, but I could dig a longer version of this, implementing more into each of the settings, because this is a cool progression and cool way of dealing with the chemistry between the mother's deal and the son, the legacy that she left her son. Very funny, Gao. The first bit before it went into the magic, the way that it was, made me think of Roald Dahl, because he does some weird, creepy things. But then when it started going into the changes, I was like, okay, this is not reading like Roald Dahl for me anymore. But still. The next story is by Aphrah Ashe, and it's called Children of Hama. When the pillar of Hama descended from the sky and the world was broken, people lost hope. Within a year, humanity had been pushed back 600 miles, where it was managing to maintain a circle of defense against the demonic invasion, but morale was faltering. Those that fought did it out of desperation and manic zealotry. Tammy, the unhallowed knight, was the one who was brave enough to move beyond the walls and the mountains that barely held back the forces of evil, and many thought that he was on their side to begin with. Tammy had been born with a black tongue. It allowed him to speak all languages and alter reality with a word. Before the pillar had been a one-man army on the horrific rampage of his own. Before, the pillar had been a one-man army on a horrific rampage of his own. Now, he stood against the forces of the hellish sky monsters, with or without allies. Tammy looked at what was named the Barren in recent days. It was originally a large city, but now it was flat land for miles around. There were no demons there, despite being below the hanging pillar that pierced the sky. But there, near the center, was a person, or at least it looked like a person. Tammy walked out of the forest and found no resistance. After weeks of fighting, he'd expected to be jumped at the moment that he entered the flats, but upon looking back, he saw demons lurking in the trees above where he'd been standing, just watching him, not moving. They were pale, tall, and gangly, with huge red butterfly wings, their faces consisting of a single massive eye. It didn't blink at all, and he continued into the Barren unharmed. After 2 hours of walking, he reached the person and realized that he was directly below the pillar, the sharp tip that hung from the sky, eerily pointing at him from high above. He looked the person up and down, and didn't like what he saw. It was some sort of wretch, covered in loose rags and with a face so broken that it was hard to determine the sex. "You come to Mother?" it asked. Its voice was a rasp, and as it spoke, its head jittered around. It made clawing motions at its chest, as if ready to tear itself open. "Who are you?" asked Tammy. He hadn't come to talk, at least not in this way. He kept his words few for fear of accidental magic, but he'd never admit that that was why he was something called a silent shrieker. "Mother has come. Mother has given." It raised its hands to the sky, and a sort of smile crossed its face. Tammy encountered 4 teeth total, and they were all cracked. "Mother will give again." There was a thud to Tammy's right, and he saw that there was now a rock. Then there was another to his left, then behind the creature. They started to bulge in place, then crack. They were eggs. They fell like the rain, and the creature laughed. Its face exploded and revealed a singular large eye, then its rags unfolded to reveal that they were actually tattered wings. It grew in size, and thousands of eggs, millions perhaps, continued to fall. The demon stood the size of a house and looked down on him, an echo of its laugh still lingering in his mind. As the first eggs hatched and Tammy recognized the demons that he'd been fighting, he decided it was time to speak a word that he dared not utter before. "Come to Mother," the massive demon said, straight into his mind like a needle. It reached out its giant claw. It reached out its giant claws to him like a welcoming hug was all that awaited him. "Destroy," was his retort. And so, reality came undone. Tammy, you're a very powerful person. That's what I get from this. Though I also got, like, some Legend of Zelda vibes, though I guess it also depends on, like, which Legend of Zelda, but it gave me Legend of Zelda monster vibes. And, like, the destroyed town. I'm thinking Ocarina of Time vibes, because it was dark. I know, There's like a lover-hater relationship in general with Ocarina of Time, but I am basic. So, you know. The next story is by Man Might Write, which, welcome. I think that's the first time I've seen your name, so welcome to LMIAY. It's a pleasure to have you. This one is called Mummies and Daddies. Sarah blinked her puffy eyes at the woman who sat across from her, both perched on comically tiny chairs. He's a child, Miss Collins. He doesn't understand his actions. Miss Collins cleared her throat. I understand that, Mum, but it's our duty to instill that understanding. And you are instilling that understanding in other kids or just targeting my son? Sarah's patience was rapidly dissipating. Miss Collins shifted backwards, her eyes resting on the bright wall display. We treat all of our students fairly, but in this instance, your son could have seriously harmed the other child. We want to work with you to ensure this doesn't become a regular occurrence. Trust me, we want to see all of the children flourish. The irate mother gritted her teeth. Look, I know my son, and he wouldn't push or hit another child unprovoked. He's such a sweet boy, aren't you, Rue? We were just playing mummies and daddies, the pudgy infant mumbled, barely glancing up from the cars he was crashing together. See, he was just playing. Picture frames clattered to the ground as the front door ricocheted against the wall, chipping more gypsum from the handle-shaped dent behind it. Hey, Rue! Sarah mustered a cheery smile as she greeted the thunderous preteen. How was school? She was answered by a worn backpack, skidding its way across the kitchen floor, colliding with force against her feet. Come on, she persisted. Tell Mama what went on. Clarissa chose that stupid Andrew to be her chemistry partner, didn't she? He yelled the words as if she'd been there for the lesson. Sarah took a breath and a slurp from her glass. Her son was a ball of turbulent hormones and directionless rage, but beneath it all she could see a sad little boy who needed his mum more than ever. She was all he had, after all. Sounds like it was her loss, hey, Rue? Tell you what, why don't we order some pizza for tea tonight? Sarah chewed her nails. Time was ticking on. Gray clouds hung on the dim winter twilight. School had ended well over an hour ago. She tapped the little green icon for what felt like the 1000th time. Still nothing. Trembling, she moved her fingers across the keypad, settling on the number 9, a number that she'd hoped to never dial. Not again. The phone slid from her sweaty grip as the door burst open. Rufus, where have you been? Where do you think? The confrontational teen spat. How can I know if you don't tell me? She tried to rein in a waver of her voice. He sounded like a man now. Not just any man either, but beneath the gruff tone and the sarcastic insults was the sweet baby who'd once curled his hand around her fingers. On the cusp of adulthood, he needed her more than ever. How can I tell you anything when they confiscated my phone? The fear in her eyes briefly reflected the malice in his. She took a deep breath and a swig from her can. Back up a minute, Rue. Who took your phone? Mr. Marks? When he gave me detention? He rolled his eyes, as though the answer had been clear from the start. When were you given detention? When that utter prick Andrew asked Carissa to the prom. Oh, sweetie. Her features softened. Heartbreak was tough at any age. Well, if she can't see how special you are, she doesn't deserve you. You should have seen his face when I splatted him on those lockers. The mother tooted, raising an eyebrow of disapproval. Rue? Tension left the boy, along with a sheepish giggle. He had it coming. Tell you what, she sighed. Oh, why don't we rent a movie? Sarah's eyes snapped open as the house shuddered. A red 2:27 a.m. glowed against the gloom. An earthquake? A robbery? That bitch has been talking to him! Her son. Talking to who? She groggily groaned, heaving herself up to a seated position. Mr. Asparagus, or whatever his name is. I don't know, and I don't care. Mr. Alphonse? The landlord? She wasn't nearly awake enough for this. A fist slammed into her bedroom door. The landing light spilt around a burly 6-foot silhouette. I don't give a shit. I told her not to, and she ignored me. She made me look like a right dick in front of Reggie. She swallowed back the acidic nausea. Reggie won't remember. He's only 3. She prayed that she was right. He made a noise akin to a roar. That's not the point! Perhaps he was right about one thing. She took a breath and reached for the bottle on the bedside cabinet. He'd made a mistake, but it was normal for couples to fight now and again. Raising toddlers was challenging, and she knew full well that Reggie could be a handful. The cheeky chap was nothing like the shy boy her towering heap of muscle had been at that age. She patted the space beside her. Tell you what, Stay here tonight and chat to Carissa tomorrow. I'm sure this will blow over. You just need a good night's sleep, away from all the temper tantrums. Sarah blinked her puffy eyes at the woman who sat across from her, both perched on stiff chairs, bolted to the ground. She took a breath and a sip from a flimsy polystyrene cup. Look, I know my son, and he wouldn't hit a woman. He's a sweet boy. I know that he's had his issues, and him and Clarissa have had their ups and downs, but what couple doesn't go through rough patches? The officer peered over half-rimmed glasses. Miss Henson has been granted a non-molestation order. Are you familiar with what that means? She swallowed, a rogue tear slipping down her cheek. All too familiar. Had she taught him to play mummies and daddies this way? Well, that escalated quickly. Sarah, you seem a little bit in over your head with this one. Great tension building throughout this, and also the way that you managed the time skips as you kind of little snapshots of Rue kind of growing up and it escalating. Very nicely handled within the word count. I know it's weird to be like smiling at this type of story, but very nicely done. The next story is by Spooky. Thank you for submitting, Spooky. It's called A Grim Fate. The snow squeaked. Oh my gosh. The snow squeaked under our boots the day my da took me to the Grims. I'd passed the adult rite the year before, but was not sent with the other young adults on a caravan. Instead, we traveled on foot through hostile forests filled with terrifying creatures to an enclave surrounded by angry walking brambles. As we neared, they parted, swaying until we entered through the fortified walls. A square sat inside a circle. The back wall held the yurts the Grims favored over stone and brick. Their retainers lived along the left and right walls in the rooms of stone, leaving the middle open. A fire pit had been made in the center, and one of the Grims sat on a chair with us. There were 5 Grims across Russia, ancient witches who created the caravans as means to save humankind. Other Grims over the world created archives to preserve knowledge. And the Grims of Russia and the Old World ruled with iron claws, but had to obey strict rule. Though for a few of them, rules were suggestions. As we crunched over the snow, instinct said this one did as she pleased. My stomach roiled, remembering what Da had said when we arrived at the shores 5 years earlier. You were not born or raised here, but it is your path that must begin. We did not return for your mother's sake. Her fate is beyond our aid. I had protested when he had added more that tore holes in my heart. Your mother came from a crime family that owed the Grims a duty. Mine had served the Grims for centuries. We were lined up and the Grims chose one male and one female to bear them a child. We were bound by powerful oaths that once you became a man, we had to bring you back, and we agreed. They sent us to the Shattered States to ensure their enemies couldn't find you. He had stared it down into his tea mug, pain high in his eyes. We were warned against having another child. But I loved your mother too much. We learned that unlike you, Ileana's magic hadn't been buffered by the Grims. Without it, she was going to burn up instead of survive her rights. I wanted to take her to Gali for help, but your mother forbade it. My parents had fought often. Seldom did they do so in front of us, but I remembered that one. Mother insisted on contacting her brother Ivan. Da had gotten so angry, he'd threatened to leave. A sick sensation had settled on my belly, and remembering that fight, I met my Da's eyes, and he shut his. Looking away, he spoke. Ivan's men bribed ring raiders to abduct Ileana, but once they saw you, they wanted you too. The attack on our caravan was two-pronged. The Vori on one side, Ringer on the other. Your mother tried to outrun them, and would have, if the Ringers hadn't had the Knights as backup. Their scans showed them that you were stronger, so they killed your sister, robbing the Vori of their prize. Your mother knew if she didn't return to Russia, her own father would have had us all killed for being cheated of his prize, your sister. The betrayal had been monumental, unforgivable. After the attack, my mother had told me Da was dead, and she blamed me for Ileana's death. She rallied our people and would have murdered the surviving Ringers to cover up her family's deceit. Instead, she was defeated by the Gemini Division Doyen, choosing to return to Russia then go through an ordeal to remain. I went to live with Doyen Emerson's second-in-command, Earl Franklin, until my dad showed up months later, with proof that we'd been targeted. We'd left within a week for Russia. I had thought that we were going to find Mother and be a family again. That second loss hurt worse than the first. Now, as I paced beside my Da into the Grimm's camp, I feared what fate had in store for me. She wasn't old or young, swathed in furs and robes bright with embroidery. Her hair was hidden under an elaborate headdress made of wool, silks, jewels, and a pair of sharpened antlers stuck out from the sides. She stared into the fire with half-lidded eyes, tapping a feather fan against one shoulder. We stopped to her left, the fire almost between us. She made us wait several minutes before standing. Most elders were small in stature, time and age shrinking them. The Grimms stood with eerie ease. She was tall enough to stare me in the eye, which made her over 6 feet. She approached us and used the fan to push my father aside, walking around me, waving the fan. Her voice was dark, mellow, startling me. "You shouldn't have told him, Xavier. Why did you?" My father cleared his throat. "He doesn't deserve to be blindsided. He did nothing wrong." She snorted. "He's alive, according to Tatiana Ivanova, and that's sin enough. If she had thought mentioning my mother would provoke violence, she was mistaken. If it took me the rest of my life, I'd find her." The Grimm smiled, a baring of teeth that I saw out the side of my eyes. "The day that you meet the bitch that bore you will be a dreaded. We don't want you to kill her, for we are the one true monsters, but you, our favored son, must become what all monsters fear." I took a deep breath. "For what reason? I know nothing of you. You can't force me into anything." The Grimm stilled as my dad hissed. "Hold your tongue, boy." She raised her fan, wagging it to shut Da up. "Answer me this. If you could have saved Ileana that day, would you have done so?" What kind of a stupid question was that? Yes, even if you knew it wouldn't matter. Memory of her bullet-riddled body stung tears in my eyes. Yes. The Grimm's eyes were backlit in fire as she stared into my soul. "Even if you knew that she would fail her rights?" Anger clenched my jaw so hard I spoke through grinding teeth. "She deserved the same chance to face the world as anyone else." Da sighed as the Grimm's eyes shone in triumph. "That, young man, is why you are here. Your heart burns with the fire of justice, of mercy for lost, the ruined, the accursed. You are strong, but must be made stronger for a long road ahead." I met those blazing eyes, refusing to be cowed. To what purpose? Am I to become a dog that strikes where you point? I will not be a slave. She stepped toward me, resting her fan alongside my face, barring Da from seeing. Power filled each word, so much my frame shuddered. "So that, when the time comes, and you find another Ileana, you can provide what she never had, a chance to live." She dropped the fan and stepped back, glancing at Da. "Xavier will be with you upon this gauntlet, young Alexander. He cannot teach you all that you must know, but he can and will begin you upon the path. Your first ordeal sits in a garbage heap outside of what remains of Krakow. There, you will find the main reason that you must go on. After, I will meet you, and you will have answers." This is cool. Is this a part of a bigger story? The vibe is so good and so fun, and I want to know more about Alexander and the Grimms and what is going on here and the trial set up for him. Great suspense and great chemistry and building between the characters. The setting, beautiful. Such a sweet piece with the interactions between the two of them. So simple and so meaningful. And I love getting to see your writing grow. The last story today is by KawaiiGroovycat, titled The Mommy Issue. I'm really not exaggerating when I say that Mommy is the most perfect woman in the world. Her skin is smooth and unblemished, the color of ivory. Her hair is so black that it looks a little bit blue, and it's perfectly shiny, and never has any tangles or knots in it. Her nails and makeup are always impeccably maintained. Even as a little girl, I knew that I was just a cheap knockoff of a perfect beauty that couldn't be easily replicated. But one day I would reach Mommy's level. Even if she looked at me like I was a hopeless child she couldn't believe had come from her own womb, and in return, I could not understand how a woman like her could exist. Humans are foul, disgusting creatures who destroy beautiful things, but Mommy isn't like that at all. She's more like a doll that doesn't know pain, neither how to feel it or how to inflict it. If everyone was like her, then the world would be a way better place and nobody would hurt anybody. Even if Daddy had turned out to be half as wonderful as Mommy, life would be so much better. I know that my dream is impractical. Still, if Mommy exists, then it can't be impossible. Not that she's really said anything about it. In fact, she doesn't really say anything at all. But that's because she's just very shy. I just have to make sure she stays the way that she is forever until I can find out how to make everyone better. That will be the easy part. Nothing a little bit of formaldehyde can't help with. I knew that you were gonna go that way, Groovy Cat, when it's mommy is perfect. You always go for the interesting way. I love your voice. Like your authorial voice. It's so special. Granted, everybody that submits always has a very unique and very special way of writing. The type of stories that you guys write, the characters that you guys write, and the genres that you choose to write are always so special. And I love this specifically because I get like a smorgasbord of fiction written by you guys. So thank you everybody for submitting. Let me know what your favorite story was today. I couldn't get to all of them because we just do 10, but better luck next time. And yeah. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?